for sale. Megillah gorilla for sale. Won't you buy him? Take him home and try him. Gorilla for sale. See in the window, Megillah gorilla, full of charm and appeal. Handsome, elegant, intelligent, sweet.
It happened in the days of Ahasuerus, that Ahasuerus, who reigned over 127 provinces, from India to Nubia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus occupied the royal throne in the fortress Shushan, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all the officials and the courtiers. The administrator of Persia and Media, the nobles and the governors of the province in his service. For no fewer than 180 days he displayed the vast riches of his kingdom and the splendid glory of his majesty. At the end of this period, the king gave a banquet for 7 days in the court of the king's palace garden for all the people who lived in the fortress Shushan, high and low alike. I want a banana. Bring me a banana. I'm hungry. Oh, it's an empty box. I want a banana.
Oops.
That's not a banana. I want a banana. Oh, service around here. All right, where the hell was I? Let's see. There were hangings of white cotton and blue wool, caught up by cords of fine linen and purple wool, to silver rods and alabaster columns. And there were couches of gold and silver on a pavement of marble, alabaster, mother of pearl, and mosaics. Royal wine was served in abundance. That's my kind of party. As befits a king, in golden beakers of varied design. And the rule of the drinking was no restrictions, for the king had given orders to every palace steward to comply with each man's wishes. In addition, King Vashti gave a banquet for women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he ordered Mehuman, Bezephtha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagatha,
Bigfoot?
Zethar, and Carcass.
Carcass?
Who came up with these names?
I have no idea.
Where was I? Let's see. The 7 eunuchs in attendance on King Ahasuerus to bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing a royal diadem. What are these words? To display her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was a beautiful woman. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, conveyed by the eunuchs. The king was greatly incensed, and his fury burned within him. I thought it said furry. Then the king consulted the sages learned in procedure, for it was the royal practice to turn to all who were vested in law and precedent. His closest advisors were Karshena, Sethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Mersena, and Memucan. These names again, I don't get it. The 7 ministers of Persia and Media who had access to the royal presence and occupied the first place in the king. Dumb.
Dumb being the operative
He
word.
asked, shall be done according to law to Queen Vashti for failing to obey the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs. Thereupon Memucan declared in the presence of the king and the ministers, Queen Vashti has committed an offense not only against your majesty, but also against all the officials and against all the peoples in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will make all wives despise their husbands, as they reflect that King Ahasuerus himself ordered King Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day the ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, will cite it to all your majesty's officials, and there will be no end of scorn and provocation. If it please your majesty, let a royal edict be issued by you, and let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be abrogated, that Vashti shall never enter the presence of King Ahasuerus. And let your majesty bestow her royal state upon another who is more worthy than she. Then will the judgment executed by your majesty resound throughout the realm. vast though it is, and all wives will treat their husbands with respect, high and low alike. I like that. The proposal was approved by the king and the ministers, and the king did as Memucan proposed. Dispatches were sent to all the provinces of the king, to every province on its own script, and to every nation in its own language, that every man should wield authority in his home and speak the language of his own people. What, you were expecting Roddy McDowell?
Samir, tell me a story. Okay, Elmo, I'm going to tell you a story. Is it from a long time ago? Yes, it is. From a long time ago, when gorillas roamed the earth. Ooh, Elmo's scared. It's okay, buddy. It's okay. We're going to be fine. Sometime afterward, when the anger of King Ahasuerus subsided, he thought of Vashti and what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. The king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for your majesty." Ooh, virgins! Let your majesty appoint officers in every province of your realm.
Elmo doesn't know what a virgin is.
Elmo, do you know? No, Elmo, cover your... Oh, Elmo has to cover Elmo's ears. There's some language in here that is not fit for Elmo, according to the gorilla behind the camera. Where was I? I don't know. Let your majesty appoint officers in every province of your realm to assemble all the beautiful young virgins at the fortress Shushan, in the harem under the supervision of Haggai, the king's eunuch. Samir. Yes. What means eunuch? You know, Elmo, there's some things that I just can't explain to you. You're just too young. Okay. Let them be provided with their cosmetics, and let the maiden who pleases your majesty be queen instead of Vashti. The proposal pleased the king, and he acted upon it. In the fortress Shushan lived a Jew by the name of Mordecai, son of Yair, son of again with these names. Yeah, the gorilla couldn't pronounce the names either, you know. I know. Anyway, son of a bunch of different guys and a Benjaminite. One of them's name was Kish. Oh, like the thing you eat with the eggs and the ham? Oh, no ham, because it's not kosher. Okay, got it. Kish had been exiled from Jerusalem in the group that was carried into exile, along with King Jeconiah of Judah, which had been driven into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. He was foster father to Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The maiden was shapely and beautiful. Ooh! And when her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her as his own. Samir? Yes. That's kind of creepy. Yeah, I know. When the king's order and edict was proclaimed, and when many girls were assembled in the fortress Shushan under the supervision of Haggai the eunuch, Esther too was taken into the king's palace under the supervision of Haggai, guardian of the women. The girl pleased him and won his favor, and he hastened to furnish her with cosmetics and her rations, as well as with the 7 maids who were due from the king's palace. Oh, she was getting a good gig. Yes, she was. And he treated her and her maids with special kindness in the harem. Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had told her not to reveal it. Every single day, Mordecai would walk about in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was faring and what was happening to her. When each girl's turn came to go to King Ahasuerus at the end of 12 months' treatment prescribed for women, for that was the period spent on beautifying them. Oh, that's a long time. Right. 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with oil of olay, 6 months with perfumes and women's cosmetics. And it was after that that the girl would go to the king. Whatever she asked for would be given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. She would go in the evening and leave in the morning for a second harem in charge of Shazgaz, the king's eunuch, guardian of the concubines. She would not go again to the king unless the king wanted her, when she would be summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter, This is very complicated. I know. Anyway, when she was summoned to go to the king, she did not ask for anything but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, guardian of the women, had advised. Yet Esther won the admiration of all who saw her. Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tevet, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women. Oh, I love Esther too. I know you do, Elmo. And she won his grace and favor more than all the other virgins. Elmo covering Elmo's ears again. So he set a royal diadem on her head. And now the gorilla will know what the diadem was. Yep, got it. And he made her queen instead of Vashti. The king gave a great banquet for all his officials and courtiers and called it the Banquet of Esther. Oh, that king's so clever! He proclaimed a remission of taxes for the provinces and distributed gifts as befits a king. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai sat in the palace gate, but Esther still did not reveal her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had instructed her. For Esther obeyed Mordecai's bidding, as she had done when she was under his tutelage. Under what? Never mind. At that time, when Mordecai was sitting in the palace gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry, and they plotted to do away with King Ahasuerus. Mordecai learned of it and told it to Queen Esther, and Esther reported it to the king in Mordecai's name. The matter was investigated and found to be so, and the two were impaled on stakes. This was recorded in the book of Annals at the instance of the king. Zamir, there's something scary here. I don't know. I think I just saw, like, Bigfoot or something. It's okay. It's all right, Elmo. I think it's time for Elmo to say, bye-bye! What's he doing? Ew! Yuck!
Hello, friends. Thank you for joining me today for Mother Goose Story Time. We're going to read another chapter in our book about beautiful Esther. Haman, such a bad man. Mordecai, such a planner. And King Ahasuerus, he was very bad too. So today we're going to read the 3rd chapter. Sometime after King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, he advanced him and seated him higher than any of his fellow officials. All the king's courtiers, those people who helped the king do his work, in the palace gate, knelt down, and they bowed low to Haman. For such is the king's order concerning him. But not Mordecai. He would not kneel or bow low. Then the king's courtiers, those guys who do all the work, who were in the palace gate, said to Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's order?" When they spoke to him day after day, he would not listen to them. They told Haman, in order to see whether Mordecai's resolve would prevail, for he had explained to them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel or bow low to him, Haman was filled with rage. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, having been told who Mordecai's people were. Haman plotted to do away with all the Jews, Mordecai's people, throughout the kingdom of Ahasuerus. In the 1st month, that is the month of Nisan, In the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Pur, which means the lot, was cast before Haman concerning every day and every month until it fell on the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. Haman then said to King Ahasuerus, "There's a certain people scattered and dispersed among the other peoples in all the provinces of your realm, whose laws are different from those of any other people, and who do not obey the king's laws." That must have made the king very angry. And it is not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them. If it please your majesty, let an edict be drawn for their destruction, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver, that must be pieces of silver, to the stewards for deposit in the royal treasury. Oh my, what a treasure! Thereupon the king removed his signet ring, took it right off, and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the foe of all the Jews. And the king said, "The money and the people are yours to do with as you see fit." On the 13th day of the first month, the king's scribes were summoned, and a decree, that means like a letter sort of that they wrote, was issued, as Haman directed, to the king's satraps, to the governors of every province, and to all the officials of every people, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language. They wanted to make sure everybody could understand what the king said. The orders were issued in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's ring. Accordingly, written instructions were dispatched and to all the Jews, young and old, children and women, on a single day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, that's the month of Adar, and to plunder all their possessions. That means they were going to take everything. The text of the document was to the effect that a law should be proclaimed in every single province. It was to be publicly displayed to all the peoples, so that they might be ready for that day. And the couriers went out post haste. They hurried on the royal mission, and the decree was proclaimed in the fortress Shushan. The king and Haman sat down to feast, but the city of Shushan was dumbfounded. And here ends the 3rd chapter in the book of Esther. Give me back my hat.
When Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. He went through the city crying out loudly and bitterly until he came in front of the palace gate. For one could not enter the palace gate wearing sackcloth. In every province the king commanded and decreed reached. There was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and everybody lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther maid and
Eunuchs.
eunuchs came.
Keep going.
Maids came and informed her the queen was greatly agitated. She sent clothing for Mordecai to wear so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he refused. Thereupon Esther Summers, Hathid, went out to Mordecai in the city square in front of the palace gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and all about the money that Haman had offered to pay into the royal treasure for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him the written text of the law that had been proclaimed in Shushan for their destruction. He begged him, show it to Esther and inform her, and charge her to go to the king and to appeal to him and to plead with him for her people. When Hathad came and delivered Mordecai's message to Esther, Esther told Hathad to take back to Mordecai the following reply. All the king's courier and the peoples of the king's province know that if any person, man or woman, enter the king's presence in the inner court without having been summoned, there is but one law for him, that he be put to death. Only if the king extend the golden scepter to him may he live. Now I have not been summoned to visit the king for the last 30 days. When Mordecai was told what Esther had said, he had this message delivered to Esther. Do not imagine that you, of all the Jews, will escape with your life being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silence in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis. Then Esther sent back this answer to Mordecai. Go, assemble the Jews who live in Shushan, and fast in my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law, and if I am to perish, I shall perish. So Mordecai went about the city and did just as Esther had commanded him. I'll go wherever you send me.
On the third day, Esther put on royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, facing the king's palace, while the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room facing the entrance of the palace. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor. The king extended to Esther the golden scepter, which he had in his hand, and Esther approached him and touched the tip of the scepter. What troubles you, Queen Esther? The king asked her, and what is your request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be granted you. If you please, your majesty, Esther replied, let your majesty and Haman come today to the feast that I have prepared for him. So the king commanded, tell Haman to hurry and do Esther's bidding. So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. At the wine feast, the king asked Esther, what is your wish? It shall be granted for you. And what is your request? My wish, replied Esther, my request, if your majesty will do me the favor, if it pleases your majesty, to grant my wish and accede to my request. Let your majesty and Haman come to the feast which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do your majesty's bidding.
I like feasts.
That day Haman went out went out happy and lighthearted, But when Haman saw Mordecai
Boo!
at the palace gate, and Mordecai did not rise or even stir on his account, Haman was filled
Boo!
with rage
Oh, my
at him. Nonetheless, Haman controlled
Boo!
and went home. He sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh, and Haman told them about
Boo!
the great wealth and his many sons, and all about how the king had promoted him and advanced him above all the officials and the king's courtiers. What is more, said Haman,
Boo!
Queen Esther gave a feast, and besides the king, she did not have anyone but me. And tomorrow, too, I am invited by her along with the king. Yet all this means nothing to me every time I see that Jew Mordecai sitting in the palace gate. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, Let
Whoops.
let a stake be put up, 50 cubits high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then you can go gaily with the king to the feast. That proposal pleased Haman,
Boo!
Boo.
and he had the stake put up.
I am not a crook. I'm a gorilla.
All right, so I have a few minutes of quiet. I know that everybody else was being silly and doing some really fun things. Not so much my thing, so I'm just going to read chapter 6. We're going to continue. That night, sleep deserted the king, and he ordered the book of records, the annals, to be brought, and it was read to the king. There it was found written that Mordecai had denounced Bigtana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, who had plotted to do away with King Ahasuerus. What honor or advancement has been conferred on Mordecai for this? The king inquired. Nothing at all has been done for him, replied the king's servants, who were in attendance on him. Who's in the court? The king asked. For Haman had just entered the outer court of the royal palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai impaled on the stake he had prepared for him. It's Haman standing in the court, the king's servant answered him. Let him enter, said the king. Haman entered, and the king asked him, what should be done for a man whom the king desires to honor? Haman said to himself, whom would the king desire to honor more than me? So Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king desires to honor, let royal garb which the king has worn be brought, and a horse on which the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal diadem has been set, and let the attire and the horse be in the charge of one of the king's noble courtiers. And let the man whom the king desires to honor be attired and paraded on the horse through the city square, while they proclaim before him, this is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor. Quick then, said the king to Haman, get the guard and the horse, as you have said, and do this to Mordecai the Jew, who sits in the king's gate. Omit nothing of all you have proposed. So Haman took the guard and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai and paraded him through the city square, and he proclaimed before him, this is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, while Haman hurried home, his head covered in mourning. There Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everywhere Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everywhere that which had befallen him. His advisers and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish stock, you will not overcome him. You will fall before him to your ruin. While they were still speaking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurriedly brought Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared.
So, I'm fixing here to read you the chapter of 7 of this here Megillah. So, here it goes. So, the king and Haman came to this feast here with Queen Esther. So, on the second day, the king asked Esther at this big, huge feast, "Sweetheart, what would it be that you would like? What does your heart desire? Whatever it is that you want, even if it's half my kingdom, I'm going to give it to you." So Esther says, "Well, if it pleases your majesty, I would really like to have my life. Because you see, there's this really evil man that works for you. His name's Haman." Right in my ear. And anyways, so he's really mean, and he wants to kill all of the Jews in the kingdom. And I just happen to be Jewish. So the king jumps up and says, "Well, who is this man that works for me that wants to do this evil thing? Where is he?" And Esther points over to Haman and says, "Well, it's him. He wants to do this evil thing." So then Haman starts to trembling and starts to shaking in his boots, and he knows he's in for some big trouble with the king. So the king jumps up and goes out to the garden to try to calm himself down. Meantime, Esther is laying on the couch, and Haman starts snuggling up to her and trying to make all nice with her and pleading and begging with her. "Oh, please, please, Queen Esther, change your mind about me, because I'm not all that bad." And then he's laying on this couch with Queen Esther, and then here come in the king. And he sees what's going on in his own palace, and he says, "What the heck is going on here? You're trying to take advantage of my wife. When I go outside the door, I come back and find this?" So then one of the other men that work for the king comes up and says, "By the way, king, this really evil man over here, Haman, he built this gallows, and he wants to hang your good buddy Mordecai." Remember Mordecai that saved your life? Well, he wants to hang Mordecai on this gallows. Well, the king is fuming, and he's got fire and smoke coming out of his eyes and his ears and his nose. And he says, "Hang him on the gallows! Hang Haman on the gallows!" And so that's what they did. They hung him on the gallows, was made for Mordecai.
That very day, King Ahasuerus gave the property of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. Mordecai presented himself to the king for Esther and revealed how he was related to her. The king slipped off his ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther put Mordecai in charge of Haman's property. Esther spoke to the king again, falling at his feet and weeping and beseeching him to avert the evil plot by Haman the Agagite against the Jews. The king extended the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther arose and stood before the king. "If it please your majesty," she said, "and if I have won your favor and the proposal seems right to your majesty, and if I am pleasing to you, let dispatches be written commanding those who were written by Haman's son of Hammedatha the Agagite, embodying his plot to annihilate the Jews throughout the king's provinces, for I can bear to see disaster which will befall my people, and how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, "I have given Haman's property to Esther, and he has been impaled on the stake for scheming against the Jews. And if you may further write with regard to the Jews as you see fit, write it in the king's name and seal it with the king's signet, for an edict that has been written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet may not be revoked." So the king's scribes were summoned at that time on the 23rd day of the third month, and that is the month of Sivan, and letters were written at Mordecai's dictation to the Jews and to the satraps and governors and officials in the 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. And he had them written in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed with the king's signets. Letters were dispatched by mounted couriers riding steeds used in the king's service, bred of the royal stud, to this effect: the king has permitted the Jews of every city to assemble and fight for their lives, and any people or province attacks them, they may destroy, massacre, and exterminate its armed forces, together with women and children, and plunder their possessions on a single day in all of the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. The text of the documents was to be issued as a law in every single province. It was to be publicly displayed to all the people, so that the Jews should be ready for that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, mounted on royal steeds, went out in urgent haste at the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed on the fortress of Shushan. Mordecai left the king's presence in the royal robes of blue and white, with a magnificent crown of gold and a mantle of fine linen and purple wool. And the city of Shushan rang with joyous cries. The Jews enjoyed light and gladness and happiness and honor. And in every province and in every city, when the king's command and decree arrived, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many of the people of the land professed to be Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them.
Chapter 9. Without doubt, the bloodiest chapter in the entire Bible, as you will soon see. And so on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, when the king's command and decree were to be executed, the very day in which the enemies of the Jews had expected to get them in their power, the opposite happened. And the Jews got their enemies in their power. Throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, the Jews mustered in their cities to attack those who sought their hurt, and no one could withstand them, for the fear had fallen upon the peoples. Indeed, all the officials of the provinces are states of the Persian Empire, the satraps, those are sort of regional rulers, the governors, and the king's stewards showed deference to the Jews because of the fear that Mordecai had placed upon them. For Mordecai was now powerful in the royal palace, and his fame spread through the provinces. The man Mordecai was growing ever more powerful. So the Jews struck their enemies with the sword, slaying and destroying. They wreaked their will upon their enemies. In the fortress of the capital city of Shushan, the Jews killed a total of 500 men. They also killed Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Pulratha, Adalia, Arizadatha, Parmashta, Arisai, Andai, and Vaizatha, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hamadatha, the foe of the Jews. But they did not lay their hands on the spoil. That is, they didn't steal anything. They just killed them. When the number of those slain in the fortress of the capital of Shushan was reported on that same day to the king said to Queen Esther, "In the fortress of Shushan alone, the Jews have killed a total of 500 men, as well as the 10 sons of Haman. What then must they have done in the provinces of the realm? What is your wish now? It shall be granted you. What is your request? It shall be fulfilled." "If it please your majesty," Esther replied, "let the Jews in Shushan be permitted to act tomorrow as they acted today, and let Haman's 10 sons be impaled upon the stake." That is, they were to take the bodies of the executed 10 sons and put them on public display. The king ordered that this should be done, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan. Haman's 10 sons were impaled, and the Jews in Shushan mustered again on the 14th day of Adar, and slew 300 additional men in Shushan. But they did not lay their hands on the spoil. In other words, they killed but didn't steal. The rest of the Jews, those in the king's provinces, likewise and mustered and fought for their lives. They disposed of their enemies, killing 75,000 of their foes. Now you know why it's the bloodiest chapter in the Bible. But they did not lay their hands on the spoil. That was on the 13th day of the month of Adar. And they rested on the 14th day, and made it a day of feasting and merrymaking. But the Jews in Shushan mustered on both the 13th and 14th days, and so they rested on the 15th day, and made it a day of feasting and merrymaking. So the question always arose, when is Purim? The 14th day of Adar or the 15th day of Adar? That is why village Jews who live in unwalled towns observe the 14th day, whereas Jews who lived in Shushan, the capital city, and the other large cities observe the 15th day, making it a day of merrymaking and feasting, a holiday, an occasion for sending gifts to one another. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent dispatches to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, near and far, charging them to observe the 14th and 15th day of Adar every year, the same days in which the Jews enjoyed relief from their foes. In that month, which had been transformed from a month of mourning and grief into a month of festive joy, they were to observe them as days of feasting and merrymaking, and as an occasion for sending gifts to one another and presents to the poor. The Jews accordingly assumed as an obligation that which they had begun to practice and which Mordecai prescribed for them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the foe of the Jews, had plotted to destroy the Jews, and had cast pur, that is, lots or dice, with the intent to crush and exterminate them on the day which the dice indicated. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded, with the promulgation of this decree, let the evil plot which he devised against the Jews recoil on his own head. And so they impaled Haman too, and his sons on the stake. For that reason these days were called Purim, after Pur. And Pur means a dice, or a die, singular of dice, a die or a lot. In view then of all the instructions in the said letter, and of what they had experienced in that matter which had befallen them, the Jews undertook and irrevocably obligated themselves and their descendants, that is, you and me, and all who might join them, to observe these 2 days in the manner prescribed and at the proper time of each year. Consequently, These days are recalled and observed in every generation, by every family, every province, every city. And these days of Purim will never cease among the Jews, and the memory of them shall never perish among their descendants. Then Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, wrote a second letter of Purim for the purpose of confirming with full authority that letter which Mordecai the Jew sent. Dispatches were sent to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the realm of Ahasuerus the king, with an ordinance of equity and honesty. These days of Purim shall be observed at their proper time, as Mordecai the Jew, and now Queen Esther, has obligated them to do. And just as they have assumed for themselves and their descendants the obligation of the fasts and lamentations, so they must be obligated to the celebrations. And Esther's ordinance validating these observances of Purim was recorded in a scroll. So what do? We Jews of Oklahoma City, do we celebrate on the first day of Purim or the second? And the answer is Jews throughout the world celebrate the first day, except in the walled city of Jerusalem, where they celebrate the day that follows. So let us, whether on the first or second day, rejoice.
King Ahasuerus imposed tribute on the mainland and the islands. All his mighty and powerful acts and a full account of the greatness to which the king advanced Mordecai are recorded in the annals of the kings of Media and Persia. For Mordecai the Jew ranked next to King Ahasuerus and was highly regarded by the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brethren. He sought the good of his people and interceded for the welfare of his kindred.